Hello everyone and welcome to Tel Tales. So this might shock you, but this is a serious one for a change. A subject close to my heart as an independent touring musician, and that's the increasing lack of live music venues. Can you have an increasing lack? Dunno. Anyway, venues are closing down, and where does that leave musicians? Going back when I was young, which sounds a long time ago, but music used to be played in most pubs. There were jam sessions all over the place where you could go and meet other musicians and hone your craft. I remember going to my first jam session when I was 12 years old. It was at a pub in Bradford called the Melbourne, which ironically closed down a few years later. I was so eager to get up and play in front of people, and it gave all of those hours of practicing at home a purpose. At first I was just singing and playing songs by Sheryl Crow and other singer-songwriters on my own. And then as I got a bit more confident with guitar solos and the other musicians realised that I was serious about it and not going to go away, the guy who ran it would get me up to play with the full bands. He'd start a random Grateful Dead song, nobody was told what key it was in, it was a case of being thrown in at the deep end, and you had no choice but to swim, because if you sank, the song fell apart. And that's how I learnt to improvise and work with band members. Well, that and the 6 hours practice that I would do before going to the jam session. So back then, I went to a jam pretty much every night of the week. Sundays at the Melbourne in Bradford, Mondays the Black Bull in Clayton, Tuesday the Peel in Bradford, up by the uni, I did a lot of growing up there, Wednesday in Batley or Wakefield, Thursday in Brighouse, and then Friday and Saturday, my parents would take me out to see bands in pubs, and it'd be back round to the Melbourne on a Sunday again. I did this week in, week out for the years leading up to my GCSEs. And there was never any issue of being under 18 in a pub. I was just accepted as a musician, which was wonderful, as between the jam sessions and watching the bands in pubs, this was my inspiration and education that was integral to my future career. Nowadays, pubs don't seem to let young people in, regardless of whether they're behaving and learning from a band. And I struggle to even name a local jam session. They just don't seem to exist anymore, not like they used to do. There used to be pub guides telling you what bands were on, where and when, websites where people would add their gigs and word of mouth, etc. There doesn't seem to be half as much of that going on nowadays, which is a bit daft really with how easy and accessible social media is. There's the odd Facebook group chatting about what bands people like, but no local gig guides where you can have a look and see what's going on near to your home. Now this next thing, it isn't all pubs, but a lot of them it does seem do this. If they've got a band on, they might put a post on social media an hour or so before the band is due to start, just to advertise what will be on that night. But you've already made plans to meet friends in the local and go for a curry, and it's too late to change plans and go see the band. That's if anything's advertised at all. If you do turn up, the band might be good, might be bad, the pub might be empty, the band might have to wait until the football is finished on the big screen or the X Factor results are in. It just seems to be that the culture of going to the pub to watch a band has been replaced with a culture of drinking and background music to shout over. Someone once told me back in the day when playing in pubs, "You're not in the music business, you're in the alcohol business." At the time, I didn't want to believe it, but nowadays, sadly, that person seems to be right. So if you're a band or musician starting out, you've spent years in a rehearsal room or practicing at home. How do you ever learn to perform in public if there are very few jam sessions or pubs putting bands on? And if there are any pubs putting music on left and you get a gig in one, you end up having to play the usual covers of Sweet Child O' Mine and Highway to Hell just to get an audience to listen, or play louder than anybody can talk so they've got to listen. Meanwhile, juggling having a normal job through the daytime just to pay for your everyday living costs. Alternatively, you can try to do original music and hope that there'll be some venues left by the end of the year, and try your best to build a following by slogging your guts out all over the country, playing to anyone who'll listen and make a major financial loss doing it. But you do it because this is what you love doing and what you've always dreamed of, and you believe in it, and hopefully one day you'll be able to do it as a career. So moving a bit bigger than the small pub venues are the pub venues with tickets. These seem to be decreasing by the day. These are the venues that have got the pub company rates and bills to pay, the bands to pay, and the hope that people will come and buy tickets to their event. But the problem is the likes of Barry and Mindy, who live down the road and drink in there the other 5 nights of the week, they don't see why they should pay a £5 to get in to see a band when they support the pub the rest of the week. So they won't pay for the live music. If everyone takes that attitude, either the band doesn't get paid and is out of pocket, or the band does get paid but the venue is out of pocket, the band doesn't get rebooked because the pub assumes that they don't have a following, and the pub eventually closes because it doesn't have the financial viability to put bands on and the doors don't open anymore. It's a tricky predicament because we all know how expensive a night out can be by the time you've had a few beers, paid to get in to see the band, paid for the taxi, and maybe got a kebab sandwich on the way home, especially when it's so much cheaper just to get a few bottles of ale from the local supermarket and stay at home. But the fact is, without people going out to see bands in their local, there will be no new bands and no local pubs in years to come, and we'll all become hermits, glued to our TV sets. A bit bigger, and we've got the mid-sized ticketed venues that hold a few hundred, like what I play, and they seem to be dropping like flies. Over the last few months, 3 of our regular venues have closed down. They were brilliant, well-supported town and city centre venues that have been around for many, many years. However, due to increasing outgoings and maintaining or decreasing incomings, these venues have had to close their doors. These venues probably won't be replaced because music venues tend to only be open on show nights, and they've got their overheads to pay for the rest of the time, so they're a very costly venture to run. We have to be very careful with our venues, as all we're going to be left with if we're not lucky is arenas with bands that have been touring for many years, or newer artists that have loads of money ploughed into them by record labels and worryingly naff TV talent shows. For bands starting out trying to perfect their craft and build a following, where will they play? If we keep losing fantastic venues, it will leave a situation where there are no medium-sized venues to go and watch bands. There'll be a few lucky pubs that have survived, a few venues that are subsidising the band nights with a battle of the bands every week, where 5 bands play every Wednesday and sell tickets for a £5 each to their mates and families, and the bands who manage to sell the most tickets get the promise of a gig at some point in the future and a crate of beer for their talents and sales tactics. We'll still have the corporate-owned arenas where we can pay a fortune to see bands who look like the size of ants from a mile away, and our beloved huge televised festivals that will be lucky if they have any independent bands playing, because how will those independent bands ever build a following, get heard, or be seen by festival organisers? How can they create a buzz without the mid-sized venues? And what about the smaller, family-friendly festivals? We've played loads of these wonderful festivals over the years in the UK and abroad, and they hold a fair few thousand people. There's camping, stalls, Turkish delight, soggy chips, real ale tents and a lovely atmosphere with famous bands and lesser-known originals bands, and they're all given the same warmth and love by the organisers and audience. I've seen quite a few of these festivals disappear, be it through red tape, financial viability, or simply the massive task of putting on such a huge event without the backing of big companies. Potentially, if we lose all of these fantastic places to see live music, the only other way you'll see new music could be as a support band, but the way onto a tour support often seems to be down to a lottery win or a record company buy-on. And as musicians, we're notoriously not millionaires, and most of us don't have a huge record company behind us with £1 billion ready to throw at it. Having said all this, a 500 capacity venue that's local to me has recently reopened. However, the only bands that they are putting on are tribute bands. There are literally no original bands or artists playing at that venue. The tickets range between £12 and £15, and you can see every typical tribute band you could ever imagine there. Sadly, it seems more profitable for a venue to put on a tribute band than an originals band, as a lot of people would rather go and watch their favourite Meat Loaf songs crooned by some bloke with a fake motorbike, fake leathers and a wig than a band who have written their own songs and worked on their own sound. Whilst we're on about tribute bands, It does sort of make me chuckle when you see a heritage act who's had a couple of hits 50 years ago touring with one original member, I think he was the triangle player or something, surrounded by 20-year-old band members warbling out the well-loved songs and claiming to be an originals band. Now, I know I'm rubbish at maths, and sometimes I struggle with the difference between fact and fiction. I'm pretty sure Time Machine's a fiction, and Wrinkle Cream is not, in fact, that powerful. Don't get me wrong, most of the older bands are brilliant, they really rock it and are lovely people. It's just the odd few that pop up sometimes that seem to be living off a name. So where does that leave the new artists? If tribute and heritage bands are the money makers for the venues, one way to succeed as a new artist could be to do covers that hark back to yesteryear when the music was great and people were used to going out and seeing bands on a nightly basis. Or maybe write some songs that sound like the bands and songs of that era, so the whole nostalgia thing sells a band to the people who remember the original, but they can't go see the originals anymore. And the younger generations who yearn for some proper music love it because it's new to them, but strangely familiar from their youth when they heard the parents playing this great music. You could go to streaming sites to try and find new artists, and there are millions of tracks up there with new artists hoping to be heard. But how do you stand out from the millions of artists on there, all hoping to do what you do, which is build a following, play the music you love to as many people as you can, and have a successful career doing something you've worked your whole life for? Meanwhile, you're watching the venues close one by one on a much too often basis and seeing the live outlet for your passion disappear before your eyes. I'm never going to change the world, but if this podcast has touched a nerve and made you feel compelled to do one thing, make that one thing to go and see a gig somewhere, whether it's a pub, a small venue, a big venue, a festival, wherever. Just support your local venues and bands. Please chat to people about it and let me know your thoughts on venues close to you. Because if we don't support our local venues and bands, we'll lose them and all we'll be left with is TV talentless shows.